can't believe I'm the only one without a meal. This is just terrible. This is too much, Mom. Emily yelled, tears welling up in her eyes as she covered her face with her hands. True to her words, in front of Emily, there was only an empty cup and some cutlery. The relatives seemed to finally realize the situation and began heckling one after another. Oh. Is this the debut of mother-in-law harassment by Susan? All right. I'm on Team Emily. Stop the harassment. Emily, don't give up. It seemed like a mix of 10% concern and 90% jesting. Seeing the relatives, already tipsy, I shrugged. To them, the disagreement between Emily and me was just another form of New Year's entertainment. As a host, it was my duty to provide more hospitality. Even to the person responsible for this situation, Emily. No choice then. I'll bring Emily's portion too, just wait a little. I said, resignedly embracing the tray and heading back to the kitchen. My name is Susan. I'm 62 years old. I lost my beloved husband 2 years ago, and since my son, John, got married and moved out a year ago, I've been living alone in this house. It would be a lie to say I'm not lonely, but I've always enjoyed my solitude, so living alone isn't too hard. I've respectfully declined each time John has asked me, why don't you come live with us? I didn't want to intrude on his newlywed life, and fortunately, with many relatives living nearby, I wasn't lonely. But later, I came to understand the real reason John kept inviting me to live with them. It was a distress signal from John to me. Mom, I need your help right now. This was one evening a few months after John got married. John suddenly called me. It was dinner time, and I was just about to eat. What's the matter? Calling at this hour? No time to explain. It's an emergency, can you come over right away? Confused by the sudden request without a reason, I hesitated for a moment. John's house was in the next state, not exactly a short distance, but I could make it. Sensing something serious from John's tone, I decided to head to his place, leaving my dinner behind. The sight that greeted me there is something I'll probably never forget. Part of the kitchen in his newly bought house was blackened with soot. The smell of burning and heat filled the air, with foam from the fire extinguisher still scattered around. And right next to the kitchen, Emily was crying bitterly. What in the world happened? We had a bit of a fire. Emily was cooking dinner, and suddenly flames shot up from the pan. John said that Emily was preparing dinner when suddenly a pillar of fire erupted from the pan. I managed to extinguish the flames with a wet cloth, but it spread around a bit. We took care of the rest with a fire extinguisher. But it made a mess of the kitchen. He explained while pressing an ice pack against his arm. Seeing him like that, I was shocked. It seemed he had burned himself while putting out the fire. First things first, I decided to tend to John's burns, leaving the kitchen for later. Fortunately, the burns weren't too severe, but it could have been a disaster. It's probably lucky that the damage was only this much. Emily, are you all right? Did you get any burns? I'm fine. As far as I could see, she didn't seem to have any burns. But it was strange that Emily, who had been cooking, escaped unharmed given the intensity of the fire. When I asked, I learned the cause of the small fire. Apparently, Emily was afraid of the oil splattering while frying some chicken. So she ended up throwing several of them into the pot from the edge of the kitchen. This caused the oil to splatter and, overheated to the limit, it ignited from the stove's flame, resulting in a pillar of fire. I was so scared. Frying is scary. Emily was still sobbing. Though she was in a state of panic, it would have been nice if she had at least helped John with his burns. I sighed softly as I cleaned the kitchen. In the end, it took me about 3 hours to clean the kitchen, and I made my way home just around midnight. Throughout that time, Emily didn't help with the cleaning, only complaining about things like my favorite pan, and I spent so much time choosing that kitchen wallpaper. Perhaps Emily isn't good at cooking? This suspicion turned into conviction on my birthday, a few months after the frying incident. At my age, my birthday isn't exactly a day of great celebration. It's more about reflecting on yet another year gone by. With my husband gone, I had no desire to be celebrated by anyone. I planned to spend the day enjoying my hobby of cooking and relaxing. But unexpectedly, John and Emily invited me over again. They wanted to treat me to dinner as a birthday celebration and to make up for the last incident. So, I decided to visit John's house once more, where I encountered yet another unforgettable event. May I ask? What kind of dish is this? I asked tentatively, looking at the object on the plate in front of me. To put it bluntly, it resembled burnt coal. Anyone would think that, seeing the haphazardly torn raw cabbage topped with bite-sized black lumps. Ah. Don't you recognize it? It's fried chicken. Surprised? Actually, I've been working hard to overcome my fear of frying, Emily said proudly. Hearing this, I glanced towards the kitchen. Though there were still traces of the fire, it seemed there hadn't been a disaster like last time. If Emily, who had been so afraid of frying, overcame her fear through effort, that was indeed commendable. But still. Fried chicken. I looked again at the black lumps in front of me. Now that she mentioned it, I could see some brown, fried spots. She must have been overly cautious due to her fear of frying, leading to them getting burnt. Even if they're burnt, the taste must be good. I tried to convince myself, but that was a tough ask. But I couldn't just not eat it. Seeing Emily waiting excitedly next to me, and John looking apologetic, I steeled myself to eat. Cooking isn't just about looks. After all, Emily had put in effort for my sake. I couldn't just disregard her kindness. I bravely put a piece into my mouth. Enduring the burnt taste, I chewed. The charred outer layer crunched and peeled off, revealing a mushy texture of the meat underneath. It was a taste I had never experienced before. What kind of seasoning did she use? It was oddly sweet. And the burnt taste was bitter. Honestly, I wanted to spit it out. Still, I managed to swallow it with the help of some water and mustered up a smile. It's delicious. Probably the most effort I've ever put into saying a word in my life. It seemed my effort paid off, as Emily smiled happily. I've often heard on TV shows about how mother-in-law meddling in the daughter-in-law's cooking can lead to family issues. A simple comment from the mother-in-law can put the son in a tough spot between his wife and mother, potentially leading to marriage troubles. But it looks like I managed to avoid that crisis somehow. My relief was short-lived, though, as Emily mercilessly brought out the next dish. It was a seafood soup, she explained, but looking at the green liquid spilling over the plate and the raw shrimp in it, I felt slightly dizzy. And now, here I am, getting an intravenous drip at the hospital. I have a few days of memory missing, including the day of the dinner invitation, but apparently I had collapsed at home due to severe stomach pain and dehydration and was discovered by a relative who happened to visit, and I was brought to the hospital. The doctor told me it was food poisoning caused by a bacterium called Campylobacter. When asked if I ate any undercooked chicken, it clicked. Needless to say, the cause must have been that fried chicken. I shuddered recalling that hellish texture and taste. And I became certain of something. Emily's level of cooking is beyond just being poor. John could be in danger if this continues. I need to do something about it urgently. When I contacted John, it turned out he too was hospitalized with food poisoning. I thought they both might have collapsed together, but Emily hadn't eaten that chicken and was surprisingly fine. Doesn't Emily eat her own cooking? I don't know about lunchtime, but for breakfast and dinner, she's on some diet and always eats just salads and smoothies. So, she probably doesn't realize how disastrous her cooking is. That's unbelievable. Doesn't she at least have a taste when she cooks? I don't know if she doesn't or just can't tell. I'm at a loss. So you've been eating that kind of food all this time? Home cooking varies, but that's seriously bad for your health. Maybe you should politely decline from now on? I advised him, thinking it might be difficult. Even when Emily caused the small fire, she never apologized, just complained. Pointing out her poor cooking might make her deny her faults and possibly lead to an outburst. John seemed to understand this and laughed resignedly. At first, I couldn't stand the bad food and always wanted to live with you, Mom. But now, even if we live together, Emily's too proud and wouldn't give up the kitchen. When I try to cook, she gets furious. Well, This time it was my fault for letting my guard down and getting food poisoning, but I've learned to fend for myself to avoid hospital trips. Don't worry, I'll be fine. That's just awful. But enduring unpalatable food isn't good for the mind or body. As a small help, I asked them to join me for New Year's at my place. Lots of relatives were coming, and adding 2 more people at this point wasn't a problem. I was ready to show off my cooking skills. John was delighted at the prospect of eating my home-cooked meals after a long time. That was a relief. I thought I might even be able to give Emily some cooking tips under the guise of sharing recipes she liked. But reality took an unexpected turn. After celebrating New Year's Eve with my son and his wife, I woke up to find the dishes I had prepared over several days had been completely transformed. When I saw the disaster in the kitchen, my sight went dark for a moment. Good morning, Mom. Thanks for the delicious dinner last night. I hope you don't mind. But I helped out with the New Year's dishes you had prepared. Helped out? This is not a prank. Oh, Mom, you're so funny, I wouldn't play a prank. I just made a few changes. New Year dishes always have the same taste, right? I thought a little twist might be good. Emily smiled innocently, and I was at a loss for words. But I felt as if something was crumbling beneath my feet. I had spent days preparing today's meals. I had ordered fresh ingredients. I had splurged on items I usually wouldn't buy, just because it was New Year's. Now, they were nothing but garbage. Ignoring Emily, who continued to proudly explain her changes, I searched for anything that might have survived her tampering. But everything was ruined. The only things unscathed were store-bought items, liquor, and a few ingredients. And there was no time to start from scratch now. John. Sorry, but could you run to the nearest open supermarket and pick up anything that looks like it could be served? It was New Year's Day. The chances of finding any nice dishes for sale were slim. But anything suitable for a side dish would do. John understood my feelings and immediately went out to shop. Eventually, I managed to salvage a meal by arranging the store-bought dishes and remaining ingredients in a box, creating a presentable appearance. Of course, I kept Emily away from the kitchen during this time. The result was far less impressive than what I had originally prepared, but it was the best I could do under the circumstances. As long as we could get through the day, that was enough. With that thought, my invited relatives began to arrive one after the other. Happy New Year! Thanks for inviting us again this year. I've been looking forward to your cooking. It's been a while, John and Emily. How have you been? The relatives exchanged greetings and sat down at the dining table. We started with a toast with wine, but soon switched to more familiar beer, eating and chatting. It seemed they were too engrossed in conversation to notice that the food was different from usual. Emily, quickly banished from the kitchen, was sitting at the table sulking, not yet grasping the situation. She noticed that there wasn't a New Year dish in front of her and looked up at me. Mom, where's mine? There's none for you. I replied tersely, poking at the New Year dishes in front of me. The relatives stopped their chatter, sensing the tension. Seizing the opportunity for attention, Emily teared up and covered her face with her hands. I can't believe I'm the only one without a meal, this is just terrible. This is too much. True to her words, in front of Emily, there was only an empty glass and some cutlery. The relatives seemed to finally realize the situation and began heckling one after another. Oh. Is this the debut of mother-in-law harassment by Susan? All right. I'm on Team Emily. Stop the harassment. Don't give up, Emily. It seemed like a mix of 10% concern and 90% jesting. Seeing the relatives, already tipsy, I shrugged. To them, the disagreement between Emily and me was just another form of New Year's entertainment. As a host, it was my duty to provide more hospitality. Even to the person responsible for this situation, Emily. No choice then. I'll bring Emily's portion too, just wait a little. I said, resignedly embracing the tray and heading back to the kitchen. Before long, I returned to the living room with an oval platter in hand. It was bite-sized meat pies. My relatives loved meat pie. This was something I had ordered a month in advance for this very day. My relatives and Emily probably thought another New Year dish like we were having was coming for her. The sudden appearance of the large platter surprised them, but of course, I meant it as Emily's altered portion. But they couldn't have known my intentions. Emily, thinking her modified dishes were finally being showcased, perked up. "Oh. We've been waiting for this. I was wondering why there were so few dishes this year. This looks delicious. Let's dig in." As soon as I set the dish on the table, the relatives reached for it. But, as expected, the moment they tasted the meat pie, screams erupted here and there. Yikes. What is this? The meat pie, it's very sweet. The relatives began drinking water, clearly disgusted. And that was no surprise. The dish was drenched in honey. Maybe a skilled chef could pair meat pie and honey well, but unfortunately, the one who added the arrangement was Emily. There must have been some other unidentifiable things mixed in too. Emily adjusted it for everyone. Right? Yes. I got the idea from maple syrup marinated grilled chicken. Not just honey. On the side was caramel sauce, and some pies had tiny gold paper pieces on them. Upon closer inspection, they turned out to be pieces of colored paper. It's New Year's, after all. You often see the decorations in the Chinese New Year dishes, right? Well, those are usually edible things. In this case, we can't eat the paper. The relatives seemed to agree, as all of them grimaced and put down their cutlery. Emily probably expected to be praised for her efforts. Emily must have a sweet tooth. We prefer spicy foods. With these strained excuses from the relatives, Emily looked downheartedly. Next, I brought out homemade roast beef. It was a favorite of my late husband and a staple in our house for years. However, even after I placed a large pot on the table, the relatives didn't reach for it. It was understandable. No one could explain why roast beef was being stewed in a pot. Except for Emily. I found a big chunk of meat, so I tried simmering it in red wine. Looks delicious, right? Please, have some. So, that's it. This bizarre color was from red wine. But the smell clearly showed the alcohol hadn't evaporated, and the color looked like it was more than just red wine. It was probably colored with chili powder or bean paste. Maybe even paint. With Emily, it wouldn't be surprising. And it was no laughing matter. Didn't you all say you liked spicy food earlier? This should pair well with drinks. Come on, try it. Having refused earlier, the relatives probably thought they couldn't escape this time. They hesitantly took a piece of what used to be roast beef from the pot and bit into it. And yet again, screams echoed around. Judging by their cries for water, it seemed to be too spicy this time. What kind of joke is this? This isn't food for humans. Even dog food would be better. It appeared they had reached their limit. Words of condemnation were hurled at Emily one after another. Realizing her arrangements were harshly criticized, Emily burst into tears. "You're all so mean. I worked so hard on it. And you have the nerve to say that after turning Mom's cooking into garbage," John said, looking at Emily with disdain. He was especially angry, probably because he used to enjoy this roast beef so much. Turned it into garbage. You mean, this was originally Susan's cooking? Yes. Everything in that New Year plate are store-bought side dishes. The New Year's dishes and soup I had prepared were all ruined by Emily. So I had no choice but to buy these. Garbage? What do you mean? Oh, sorry. Poison would have been more accurate, especially since this was lying next to the pot. I held up an empty spice bottle for everyone to see. It was labeled a nutmeg. The spice commonly used in meat dishes and found in most kitchens. It had been unopened just the night before. So, Emily must have poured the entire bottle into the pot. Do you know? Nutmeg is a great spice for meat dishes in small amounts, but it can be toxic. There have been cases of death from overdose. The lethal dose is just 10 grams. It's the most common poison. No way. This bottle contains 15 grams, and all of it was put in the pot. Eating all of it would surely bring the Grim Reaper. You're kidding. You were trying to send us to the hospital. Angered by being served worse than dog food and nearly being poisoned, the relatives' complaints turned into shouts. Overwhelmed by their intensity, Emily started crying and defending herself. But I didn't know. Nutmeg is for meat, right? I just wanted to make it tastier. I'm not bad. Right, like the time you said you didn't know about Campylobacter. No one ever told me about it, you said. Yeah, right. You've never learned the basics of cooking from anyone, never listened to advice, never properly read a cookbook, always cooking on a whim. Without even tasting your own food. That's why you end up making garbage like this. John's scolding left Emily stunned into silence. She had probably thought John was on her side. But John mercilessly called the dishes garbage and turned to the relatives. He was still angry that they had prematurely labeled me as the mean mother-in-law without knowing the full story. Now you see why Mom didn't serve Emily. She ruined Mom's cooking. And she's not even remorseful. Someone like that doesn't deserve a decent meal. Am I wrong? If you still take Emily's side after this, I'll cut ties with all of you right here. Faced with John's reasonable argument, the relatives had no response and hung their heads. As I offered them in seconds, with a pot of meat, they screamed and recoiled, some even falling from their chairs. As I remained silent, they eventually began to mutter apologies. After reflecting, the relatives ate only the store-bought dishes and left, apologizing. Emily, caught in the confusion, tried to leave too, but John and I made sure she stayed and took responsibility for cleaning up the mess she made. Of course, by eating it. As a result, she's now in the hospital. She couldn't eat more than a few bites of each dish, which was disappointing for me. But it was a good opportunity for her to learn how horrendous her cooking was. Later, struggling with the disposal of the leftovers, I decided to take them with me to visit Emily in the hospital. I thought showing them to the doctor would help explain her condition accurately. But there, I fortuitously ran into Emily's parents, who were also visiting. I naturally handed them the leftovers. As a result, Emily was forcibly returned to her parents' home upon discharge. Emily's parents apologized repeatedly, saying, "We didn't know that Emily was feeding such terrible things to John." They said, "We don't need any treatment costs and are fine if John wants a divorce." This finally eased the frustrations John and I had been carrying. The relatives gave us a lot of high-quality meat, alcohol, and fresh fish, as an apology. When I said I couldn't eat it all alone, they suggested redoing New Year's, and John and I laughed. After all, the year doesn't start without eating Susan's cooking. I took those words to heart, happy. Indeed, cooking is about making people happy. So, I'll keep improving my skills, making those who look forward to my cooking smile.